A quiet young woman, still trembling after leaving a mark on a stranger's car, slipped a handwritten apology under the wiper. She thought the matter was over, but the car's owner came searching, not for money. He had once been wealthy, filmmaker whose dreams had died unfinished. Yet her honesty, so small yet rare, stirred something he thought was gone, because sometimes a single scratch is where the first light slips in. That afternoon, the sky was the dull sheen of tarnished silver, washed in gray. The bite of autumn clung to the pavement and to the frame of the bicycle she guided beside her. She was slight, careful in her steps, as if afraid of disturbing the air around her. At the far corner of the nearly empty lot, she eased her bike, through a narrow space beside a polished black car. Even with her caution, it happened. A soft click. A faint line across glossy paint, thin as a thread, but to her ears it sounded like a sentence passed. She froze. Breath caught. No one had seen. She could have left. No one would know. But she couldn't. From her backpack, she pulled paper. Her hands shook so badly she rewrote the note 3 times. At last, in neat rounded letters, smudged with damp fingers, it read, "I accidentally scratched your car? I'm so sorry. I don't have much, but I'll take responsibility. Even if you're angry, I hope you can forgive me. Here's my number." She tucked it beneath the wiper, hair falling into her eyes, standing there as though apologizing silently with her gaze. Then she walked her bike away. All through her lecture later, she couldn't concentrate. The numbers on the screen blurred, her mind replaying the scratch, the note, the fear of someone calling, demanding more than she could ever pay. She lived on her own, studied part-time, worked weekends in a cafe. Her parents had little. She owned almost nothing and guarded every belonging. Mistakes always carried weight. Her phone stayed silent. Somehow that was worse than any ringing. The next day, riding to her shift at the bookstore, she spotted the car again in the same place. Her chest tightened. She hurried past, not even daring to look. That evening, under a pale crescent moon, she unlocked her bike and noticed him. A man leaned casually against the car. He was older, perhaps mid-40s. Black shirt, long coat, an old notebook in his hand. He didn't glance at her at first, but when she drew closer, his eyes found hers. "You're the one who left the note." She froze, heart pounding. Yes, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. I can pay if—" "I didn't call," he said, voice low, calm. "I wanted to meet you myself." Her hands gripped her straps until her knuckles whitened. "I don't have much, but I'll find a way. You think I came for money?" His laugh was soft, almost disbelieving. For the first time, she looked up at him. The lamplight traced the lines of his face, the weariness in his eyes. Not anger, not superiority, but something gentler. "Not many admit a mistake when no one's watching," he said. "That's rare." She stayed quiet, uncertain whether to believe him. "You know," he added, half to himself, "sometimes even a scratch lets in a new beginning." They parted soon after. He never asked for money, never asked for her number. She cycled home lighter, though still unsettled. His words kept circling in her thoughts. At her desk later, she smoothed out one of the discarded notes, smeared with ink and worry. This time, instead of tears, a small laugh slipped out, half nervous, half relieved. Maybe today wasn't such. A bad day after all. The following morning she woke early, sleep broken by fragments of his face, his voice, his words. They'd spoken barely a handful of sentences, yet he stayed in her mind. His gaze hadn't been pity, not judgment. Just something real. She planned to take the longer way around to avoid the lot. She wasn't ready to face him again, but at her favorite cafe near campus, she saw him waiting. At the corner table, under warm, golden lights. He lifted a hand, not demanding. Just an invitation. She hesitated, then stepped closer, heart racing. I guessed you'd pass here, he said. Didn't think a simple note would keep me awake all night? She lowered her eyes, fingers tightening on her bag. She still didn't know what a man like him wanted from someone like her. Her backpack. The silence between them wasn't strained. It was soft, like background music meant only to be felt, not heard. He handed her a cup of warm milk coffee. Did I get it right? I don't do bitter, she nodded lightly. Me neither. She looked at him. Really looked for the first time. His face bore the signs of someone who'd been through weather, but hadn't let it strip the softness from his eyes. Worn, but not hardened. I used to think honesty was a given. He began, his voice growing quieter until I started noticing how rare it's become. She wasn't sure if he meant her or something else entirely, but inside that sentence, she sensed an unnamed sorrow. I just thought if I pretended nothing happened, I wouldn't be able to sleep, she said truthfully. He paused, then nodded. There was a time, he said, when I left a note too. I was younger. They didn't believe me. Called me a vandal. Cursed me out. After that, I stopped trying to explain. She looked at him, her eyes wide, and for a moment the gap between them, age, background, everything, folded in. Left only two people, both a little bruised by the times they tried to do the right thing and weren't met with kindness. But yesterday, he continued, I realized if someone like you still does the right thing, then maybe the things I used to believe in aren't completely lost. Her throat tightened. Not from emotion exactly, but from the unfamiliar sensation of being trusted by someone who owed her nothing. My name's Caleb, he said after a pause. Caleb, right. I'm Laya, LLA. He repeated it like a name from a language he once knew but hadn't spoken in years. Foreign and strangely comforting. What do you do? She asked, the question slipping out more easily than she expected. I used to make films. Now I'm learning how to live again. She didn't fully understand what that meant, but it didn't matter. Just as he didn't ask her what she studied or where she lived or why she chose honesty when she could have walked away, between them, there was a kind of recognition that didn't need a name. I didn't come to ask for money, he said at last. I just wanted to say thank you, and if you'll let me, I'd like to buy you breakfast. For scratching your car, for reminding me that sometimes the smallest things open the biggest doors. She smiled, a real one, her first of the morning. And so they sat there under the cafe's awning in the crisp morning light, sipping coffee and sharing pieces of their lives. Not quite strangers, not yet friends. Just two people who for a brief quiet moment happened to sit down inside the same tender coincidence of the world. Caleb took her to a place he called the world that fell asleep. It was an old movie theater hidden behind two rows of red brick buildings. The wooden sign was peeling, the glass doors clouded with dust and time. Once a place people flocked to, now it held only slanting shafts of sunlight through forgotten windows and the familiar mustiness of things once beloved. I used to work here, Caleb said as he slowly pushed open the door. In the early days, I did everything. Wiping seats, changing bulbs, hanging posters. But every time a film played, I'd stand in the corner and pretend I was directing it. Laya stepped inside, flinching as the door's creak echoed through the hollow space. She didn't know why he'd brought her here, but she could feel it. Something important lived in this silence. Something he hadn't said aloud before. The first film I directed premiered right here, Caleb said, eyes lifted toward the faded screen. It wasn't a success. The critics tore it apart. Investors pulled out. I lost almost everything. My reputation, my confidence. He sat in the center row where the sound hits just right. Laya joined him close enough to feel the quiet between them start to carry its own meaning. Do you know what hurt the most? Caleb turned to her, his voice low, his eyes heavy with memory. Not the failure, the silence after that film. No one said anything. No advice, no criticism, just nothing. As if I'd vanished. Laya said nothing. She understood. Silence has its own weight, especially when it comes from those who once believed in you. I got a few offers after that, he continued, his tone flat, like narrating someone else's life. But I turned them down. I was afraid of failing again, and worse, of having nothing left to lose. She looked at him and for a moment saw herself the nameless fears, the quiet compromises, the way we retreat from what we love because it asks more courage than we think we have. Time passed, he said. I invested real estate, stocks, whatever. People said was smart. I made money. They called me a millionaire, but every time I saw a blank screen, something in me stayed empty. She exhaled softly. Do you still have the script? Caleb gave a wistful smile. I do, but I haven't opened. Set in years? I'd like to read it, she said after a pause. If you'll let me. He turned to her, not surprised exactly, but moved as if someone had reminded him that a door he thought was shut might still be waiting to open. I thought I came to thank you, he said. I didn't expect you'd make me wonder if I could begin again. I don't know anything about filmmaking, Laya said with a small smile, but I know what it's like to be afraid. And I think if you wrote that story, it deserves at least one person to read it. Caleb looked at her. For the first time in years, someone saw him without flinching at his success or pitying his failure. She looked at him as if he still mattered for reasons that had nothing to do with money or legacy. Then I'll let you read it, he said. But you have to promise me one thing. What? Be honest. Even if you hate it, even if it's awful, tell me the truth. She nodded without hesitation. He stood, walked to the back of the theater, and disappeared into the old projection room. Minutes later, he returned with a stack of yellowed pages wrapped in a battered cardboard cover. In the corner, faded. Words read, Scene 57, rewrite pending. I never wrote the ending, he said quietly. I was too afraid to face it. She took the manuscript, her hands trembling, not from its weight, but from everything it carried. The pain, the hope, the years of silence pressed between each page. She said nothing more, only held it a little tighter, as if making a promise no one else could hear. Laya didn't sleep much that night. The manuscript Caleb had given her still held the scent of old paper, soft and nostalgic, like a memory, pressed between the pages of a forgotten book. She kept it on her desk beside a cold cup of tea and the quiet glow of her desk lamp. She didn't read it like someone trained to. She wasn't a screenwriter. She didn't know how to judge arcs or pacing, or the architecture of 3 acts. But she read with feeling, with her own trembling, her own quiet fears, her own unspoken things. The story was about a man who had once made a living telling stories, but after a sudden loss, lived only in the past. He drifted through old cinemas, unfinished scenes, conversations he never dared to, right to the end. Near the final pages, a girl appeared, not to save him, but simply to listen. When she reached scene 57, the last scene, it was empty. Only a faint note scribbled at the bottom. Rewrite pending, but maybe silence is enough. She read that line over and over, not because it was difficult, but because it felt like it was about her. She tore a corner from a sheet of paper and wrote, something by hand, not as an editor, but as someone adding a single note to an unfinished melody. Nothing grand, no analysis, just words. Her heart understood. The next morning, she brought the manuscript back to the old theater. Caleb was already waiting in the cafe next door, his espresso cooling on the table, his expression as it had been the day before. Calm, but carrying a quiet expectancy. I thought you'd take a week, he said when she stepped in. So did I. She smiled, softly. She handed him the manuscript. A small slip of paper was tucked inside, nestled at scene 57. No explanation, no markings, just there, like a breath someone had left behind. Caleb opened it. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the ache of touching, something that had been silent for too long. He read. The room fell into stillness. Only the faint tick of a wall clock and the slow movement of light across the window pane. And if you believe silence is the last thing worth saying, then I think silence only has meaning when someone listens closely enough to know it's not empty. He stopped at the final line. His hand rested on the page, unmoving. I wrote that, she said gently. Because if you end the story in silence, the audience might think you had nothing left to say. But I think you do. You're just afraid no one will hear it. Caleb didn't look up at once. He kept his eyes on the paper as if rereading it. Not with his eyes, but with something deeper. That sentence, he said, his voice low and steady. You wrote it from someplace, very deep inside you, didn't you? Laya didn't answer. She didn't need to. He closed the manuscript slowly. When he looked at her again, something had shifted in his eyes. Not simple emotion, but a kind of gratitude so whole it felt sacred, like someone had just returned a piece of his life he hadn't realized was still missing. You have no idea what you've just done, he said. Not just for this story, but for me. Laya lowered her gaze and smiled. She didn't need to understand it all. It was enough to know that what she'd written hadn't been ignored. They left the cafe together, saying nothing more. About the script or the ending, but something had changed. In the rhythm of their steps, in the quiet between their words, it was clear something new had begun. Not as mentor and student, not even as collaborators, but as two people who had once lived in silence, now learning gently how to speak again. The small room in the old theater became their near-daily refuge. It wasn't an office, not even a proper workspace, just a worn wooden table, two wobbly chairs, and soft light slanting through a dust-veiled window. But to Caleb and Laya, it was quiet enough to hear themselves think. They didn't dive into writing right away. In those early days, they mostly sat with takeaway coffee and talked about film scenes that had left them breathless, books that made them cry for reasons they couldn't name, or simply the damp, familiar scent of the theater's wood and walls. Some days they'd spend nearly 3 hours debating a single look in Scene 2. Should the man meet her eyes or look away? Should he stay silent or smile faintly as she walked off? For the first time in years, Caleb picked up a pen again. His hand moved slowly, sometimes pausing mid-sentence, as if the words were still shaking off the dust of disuse. Laya scribbled in blue ink, tiny notes, lines of dialogue, or just a quiet question mark beside a paragraph. There was no hierarchy between them. No one better, just mutual respect, a kind of co-creation Caleb had never experienced before. Not a junior writer, not an assistant, but an equal voice, even if hers was younger, even if she had never written a script. Every time I write, Laya said one afternoon as they paused, sunlight catching the rim of her empty teacup. It feels like I'm answering a question I don't know how to ask aloud, and I write like I'm searching for an old house I thought was torn down, Caleb replied, smiling faintly. The script began to change. It was no longer just a story about a man who had lost his passion. It became the journey of two people, one who had once lost his voice and one who'd never believed hers was worth hearing, learning together how to write what they never thought they could. One morning, as they reread the newest draft of Scene 57, a stranger stepped into the theater. His name was Marcus, a film producer, hair silvered with age, carrying the presence of someone who'd lived long in the industry but hadn't lost his sensitivity. He had worked with Caleb years ago and still made a habit of visiting the old cinema, every weekend, like a quiet ritual. I heard someone's breathing life back into this place, Marcus said, spotting the manuscript in Caleb's hands. You're writing again? Caleb hesitated, not out of embarrassment, but because he wasn't sure he was ready to call what they were doing a comeback. "Not alone this time," he said, glancing at Laya, who was gathering pages on the table. Marcus read a few pages. He didn't say much. His expression remained unreadable, but his brow furrowed not with displeasure, but with focus. "She wrote this line," he asked, pointing to a bit of dialogue in the middle of a scene. "She helped me realize it needed a new voice." Marcus nodded, then fell into a long, thoughtful silence. Before leaving, he set a business card on the table. "If the two of you are serious, give me a call. Maybe it won't become a filmer, but it's worth hearing more." After he left, Caleb turned to Laya. Something in his gaze lit with a kind of fragile brightness, like sunlight breaking through thick cloud. "You just made me remember something," he said. "What's that?" "That it's not only the people with big ideas who get to make films. It's the ones who believe their story is worth telling." Laya said nothing, but something inside her unfurled, a small green shoot after a long, quiet winter. They didn't rush to call Marcus, didn't make plans. But from that day on, they wrote more, steadily. A little each day, not because of ambition, not for the hope of production, but because finally their words felt like they had found a way forward. The meeting room wasn't large, but the white light from the ceiling made everything feel brittle and sharp, as if emotion had no place there, hidden beneath lines of logic, budget breakdowns, and a dozen variations of the same question. But will it sell? Caleb sat at the head of the table. Across from him were Marcus and two investors. One younger, slicked back hair, eyes fixed on a tablet, the other older, thick glasses, sipping coffee he never seemed to swallow. Laya sat beside Caleb, her hands folded in her lap, damp with sweat. She had prepared everything, the stories, arc, her defense of the ending, examples of films that moved audiences with emotional honesty. But nothing could prepare her for those evaluating stares. Not unkind, just quietly clinical. The kind that made her feel like a schoolgirl again, waiting to be called to the front of the class. The current ending. It's too vague. The younger investor said, "Audiences today need clarity, a kiss, a hug, something that hints at the future." Caleb opened his mouth, but Laya spoke first. Her voice was quiet, but steady. "Because it's not a story about ending." Every eye turned to her. She swallowed and continued. "People don't need the characters to kiss to believe they'll be okay. What they need is something real. To see someone who gave up choose to try again. To see a girl who thought she was invisible write her voice into the world for the first time." The older man frowned. "You're suggesting it ends within a monologue, no visual resolution." "Not all clarity is powerful," Laya answered. "Sometimes the power is in what's left unsaid." Caleb turned to look at her. He didn't interrupt, not because he didn't want to, but because for the first time he saw her stand for something. Not for him, but for the story that had become theirs. "This isn't a film about action," she went on. "It's a film about interiority, about small things. A scratch on a car, a handwritten note, an unfinished script. All the moments that seem meaningless, but quietly change a life." Silence settled over the room. Then Marcus smiled, just barely, a flicker at the corner of his mouth. He nodded slowly, like a man remembering why he began in this business at all. "We invest," Marcus said, "not only in what's guaranteed to sell, but in what might move someone." The younger investor nodded reluctantly, though his expression stayed cautious. The older one said nothing more, but he didn't object. On the walk home, Caleb was quiet for a long while. They strolled through still streets, the season shifting toward winter, the wind already tinged with dryness with the beginning of cold. "I used to think it was my job to protect this story," he said finally, not looking at her. "But today, I realized it's not just mine anymore. Laya said nothing. She didn't need to. What she knew, what she felt in her chest, was that for the first time her voice hadn't trembled when she spoke what she believed. Not because she had grown stronger, but because she understood. If she didn't speak for it, no one else would. "I'm proud of you," Caleb said softly. She looked ahead. The street lights were flickering on now, casting golden light across the bare, limb trees. There was no music in her head, no applause, and just a stillness, the kind that only those who have been afraid truly recognize, the stillness that comes when you finally step through fear. She was no longer the girl who left a trembling apology under a windshield wiper. She was the one rewriting the ending, not just of a script, but of herself. Music. The afternoon settled slowly, as if the world itself was gently bracing for something important, something that didn't need to announce its arrival. The sun slipped behind brick rooftops, casting a golden hue over the narrow street, where the old cinema still stood, quiet, but never forgetful of why it remained. There was no red carpet, no photographers, no tuxedos or sweeping gowns, just a wooden sign propped outside, chalk written in soft white strokes. Tonight, one story, two hearts, countless silences. Laya stood at the doorway in a simple pale blue dress, her hair pinned back, arms wrapped around the worn notebook where she'd once scribbled the first lines of Scene 57. Her heart raced, not from fear of failure, but from the tremor of being seen, truly seen for the first time through every word, every glance on screen. Inside, Caleb adjusted the projector one last time. Under the amber glow of the ceiling, lights. He looked nothing, like the man who had once hidden behind past claim. There was something in his eyes now, something quietly lit, as if he'd just reclaimed a part of himself, long thought lost. No more than 30 people came. Old friends of Caleb, a few of Laya's colleagues, the woman from the cafe where they'd first sat together, the retired theater guard, still carrying the key to the projection room like a relic when the lights dimmed and the screen lit up. Laya held her breath. The film lasted under an hour. No special effects, no shocking twists, no crashing climaxes, just still frames, sparse dialogue, and long, deliberate silences where characters simply looked at one another or said nothing at all. And yet, within those silences, something stirred. In the scene where the man stands alone in the empty cinema facing a blank screen, Laya saw that Caleb had chosen the exact angle from the day he first spoke of his failure. In the moment where the girl slips a note beneath a windshield wiper, the camera held still. So still you could hear her breath, the breeze, the trembling of a kindness no one witnessed. Then the ending, not dialogue exactly, but a woman's. Her, voice soft and almost weightless, like smoke. Not everyone has the courage to speak, but if someone is listening, then even silence becomes a language. The screen faded to black. There was no burst of applause, just a few long exhales, a quiet sniffle or two, unhidden. Someone whispered from the back, "That was me once." Laya looked at Caleb. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Everything had already been said, frame by frame. After the screening, people gathered in the courtyard. A tea table, a plate of homemade cookies, and strings of soft lights hung above their heads. One of Caleb's old friends clinked glasses with Laya and said, "That story, it was honest. Thank you for not giving it an easy ending." A middle-aged woman, someone Laya didn't know, took her hand gently and said, "I was silent for years." Watching that, I saw myself. Laya didn't know what to say. She only smiled, light as a breeze. When the courtyard had emptied, only the two of them remained. Caleb sat on the steps outside the door, shoes dusted with the evening stillness. Laya sat beside him, leaning lightly against his shoulder. "I was thinking," if someone asked me whether this was the last chapter or the first one, she whispered. Caleb looked toward the quiet night sky, his mouth curving faintly. I'd tell them it doesn't matter. What matters is that we keep writing. The po. Two of them sat there between the hush of street lamps and stars, not needing their story to be tied shut, because what counted most had already been spoken, not through dialogue, but through silence. The very next morning, the season's first rainfall came without warning. Gentle drops patterned the glass of Laya's window as she sat at her small desk next to a cactus and the amber glow of her lamp. In front of her lay the script's final printout, its old title gone, replaced with a plain one, Scene 57. She had rewritten the ending, not for producers, not for an audience, not for anyone's approval. She did it because something inside her demanded it, something quiet but persistent. In this new version, the heroine said little. There were no confessions, no sweeping music, no dramatic gestures, just a girl in a cafe opening a notebook, beginning to write. Not for anyone else, but for herself. Caleb read the pages alone in the old theater. The projector hummed, the screen blank. No one sat beside him, just the script in his hands, each line he absorbed slowly. When he reached the last sentence, he stopped, not because he was confused, but because the words struck too close. We don't always choose when a story begins, but we can choose how to end it. For him, it wasn't a line on paper. It was grace, a doorway, a new start. A week later, Laya returned to her parents' house in the suburbs. She didn't bring the manuscript to show off, only to slip it quietly onto the bookshelf in her childhood room, a silent token of something she once thought she could never do. Her mother noticed the stack of pages and smiled gently. You used to scribble diary notes on the backs of bread wrappers. Now look, you've written a whole film. Laya brushed, her hand across the spine. I just rewrote the fears I once thought defined me. On another afternoon, Caleb invited her for a walk in the park where everything had first started. The leaves had fallen. The bench where she'd once left an apology note had been freshly painted. I used to think every ending was sad, Caleb said softly. Maybe I just never waited long enough to see past it. An ending isn't where a story dies, Laya replied. It's where it finally stops needing to be explained. They didn't hold hands. They didn't need to. There was no staged romance, but in the glance they shared while walking in step, there was calm, as if everything had fallen gently into place. Winter crept in. One morning, Laya sat again at her desk, not to draft a screenplay, but to write a letter. To the one who once believed they weren't enough. I used to think a scratch meant failure. But now I see. It's simply where the light can enter. Thank you for stopping to read the note I left behind. If you hadn't, this story might never have begun. If this were a film, the frame would hold a girl in a quiet room, morning light, spilling across the floor. No soundtrack, just the sound of pen on paper, the soft exhale of someone who finally found the courage to tell her own story. And the truth is, the story isn't finished. It's only been written anew. So if you've ever wondered whether your small acts matter, remember this. Even a simple apology can change the course of a life. If this story spoke to you, leave a like, a comment, or share it with someone who needs the reminder that kindness always finds a way, even in silence. And don't forget to subscribe, because maybe, just maybe, the next story will carry a piece of you inside it.